All right, I don't know why that previous lecture ended so abruptly, but let's pick up, please, in the 20th Amendment, Section 3. What we said was that if sometime between the election day and inauguration day, the president elect should pass away, right? He's dead. Who is going to be elected? Who's going to be inaugurated as president? And the answer is simple. It'll be the vice president elect. He will take the office not of vice president, but he will take the oath of office as the president of the United States. So that problem has been solved. Here's the next scenario. What happens if the election of the president goes to the House of Representatives and it's inauguration day and the House of Representatives has not chosen a president yet? Well, what we said was that the vice president elect will be sworn in as vice president, and then he will serve as the temporary president until the House can elect a president. Now, here's the next scenario. This is where we got cut off. And the Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither a president elect nor a vice president elect shall have qualified. So neither a president nor a vice president has been elected. And so the election of the president has been sent to the House, and the election of the vice president has been sent to the Senate. And in this scenario, neither the House has elected a president nor the Senate has elected a vice president, and it's inauguration day. Who is going to be sworn in? As is often the case in the Constitution, if there's no clear answer, then it'll say something like this: the Congress shall decide. And that's exactly what happens here. The Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither a president elect nor a vice president elect shall have qualified, declaring who shall then act as president, declaring who will be the temporary president, or the manner in which one who is to act shall be selected, and such person shall act accordingly until a president or vice president shall have qualified. So, we don't have a president and we don't have a vice president yet, and yet it's inauguration day. The Congress has the power to name a temporary president. Now, what they've got to do, whoever they name as the temporary president must be qualified to be president, right? They got to be at least 35 years of age. They got to satisfy the citizenship requirement. They've got to satisfy the residency requirement. But if they satisfy those three items, then the Congress can choose whoever. I mean, they could call me. They probably don't want to make me president, right? I would shake things way up. But could they? Yeah. Could they call anybody who qualified in those three areas? Yes, they could. And that person then would act as the president until either the president was elected by the House or the Senate was elected by the Senate elected the vice president. Section 4 of the 20th Amendment says the Congress may by law provide for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the House of Representatives may choose a president whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them, and for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the Senate may choose a vice president whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them. All right, here's the scenario. Do you realize what the 20th Amendment is trying to do here? It's trying to plug up some of these potential loopholes, these potential problem areas, things that were not really discussed in the original Constitution. It's 150 years later, right? And people are beginning to realize that there were some shortcomings in the original Constitution that need to be addressed, and that's what they're doing here. All right, Section 4. We know that if a person is not elected president outright, then the election of the president goes to the House of Representatives. Now, the old original Constitution said that as many as 5 names can be sent to the House of Representatives, right? But we also know that the 12th Amendment reduced that number down to 3, right? 3. So here's the scenario. You've got 3 people to choose from, and nobody's been inaugurated yet, right? The old president, whoever he was, is still the president. But now it's inauguration day, and one of those 3 people who are going to be, from whom the House is going to choose, one of those 3 people dies. What do? The Congress may by law provide for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the House of Representatives may choose a president, whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them. So, the Congress has wide latitude. The House of Representatives has very wide latitude here. Remember that, at least theoretically, they were going to choose from a list of 3. But one of those guys has died. They've only got 2 left. The House can choose from those 2 who's going to be the next president, if they want to do it like that. Or they can say, well, this other guy who wanted to be the president too, let's make him the number 3 guy. Let's send his name. And now the House is back to having 3 names to choose from. Can they do either one of those things? Absolutely. Sure can. This has never happened. And so we don't know exactly how it would work out, because it's never happened. We cannot look back and say, oh, well, this happened in 1936, and so we know. No, this has never happened. And we're hoping that if it does happen, that there won't be a political crisis, that they'll simply follow the options that are available. Now, the same thing is true in the Senate. The 12th Amendment said, remember, in the original Constitution, if the choice of electing the vice president went to the Senate would choose from 3 names. But the 12th Amendment reduces that from 3 to 2. Now, what happens if one of those 2 guys dies? Well, the Senate has options. The simple thing to do would be simply to say, well, the guy who's still alive is now the vice president, right? Or they could nominate a replacement for the dead guy and then choose the vice president from the new list of 2. Let me read that again. The Congress may by law provide for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the House of Representatives may choose a president, whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them, and for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the Senate may choose a vice president, whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them. Now, Section 5 says, Sections 1 and 2 shall take effect on the 15th day of October following the ratification of this article. Now, what is the content of Section 1? Section 1 is the section that changes the inauguration dates of the president and the vice president. So that's what is referred to here in Section 5. And what is Section 2? That is the idea that the Congress has to meet at least once a year, and that they will meet on the 3rd day of January. So, Section 1 and Section 2, as soon as the 20th Amendment was ratified, whenever that was, the next 15th of October is when Sections 1 and 2 would go into effect. Section 6 says, this article, this amendment, shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislatures of 3/4 of the individual states within 7 years from the date of its submission. Once again, there is a expiration date for the terms of the 20th Amendment, and just as the earlier amendment, the period of time is 7 years. All right. The 21st Amendment. The 21st Amendment is unique because the 21st Amendment does away with a previous amendment. Many people think that once something becomes a part of the Constitution, it's engraved in stone. It cannot be changed. And here's proof that that's not true. What was the 18th Amendment? It was the Prohibition of Alcohol Amendment, right? What is the 21st Amendment? It does away with the 18th Amendment. Let's read it. Section 1 of the 21st Amendment says, the 18th Article of Amendment, right, the Prohibition Amendment, to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. So that's no uncertain terms, right? It is repealed. It is dead. It no longer works. It's as if the 18th Amendment has never been written. The 21st Amendment totally and absolutely cancels the 18th Amendment. Section 2 says the transportation or importation into any state, territory, or possession of the United States for delivery or use therein of intoxicating liquors in violation of the laws thereof is hereby prohibited. Fundamentally, what Section 2 does is that it creates a partnership between the federal government and the state governments for creating liquor laws. And basically the control of liquor laws in Section 2 is returned to the states. Now, I don't drink. When I was when I was your age, I did my best. I'm ashamed to say, but to be totally honest with you, I did my best to develop a taste for alcohol, and I never developed it. It was nasty and it made me sick. But I tried. And what I discovered when I was your age, and I hate to say that, but when I was your age, the drinking age in Louisiana was 18. It's 21 now, but it was 18 then. Many of us could drink legally while we were still in high school. And what we discovered was that the laws around the state of Louisiana are weird, and they're almost contradictory. For example, uh, we discovered now Hammond is in the 7th ward of Tangipahoa Parish. Um, University Drive, which is, you can't see me, but it's that way. University Drive is the new name for that street. That street, when I was growing up, was called Ward Line Road. As a matter of fact, it's still called Ward Line Road over on the west side of I-55. South of Ward Line Road was the 7th ward. North of Ward Line Road was the 8th ward. 7th ward was wet. You could buy booze as long as you were the right age, right? You could buy booze. The 8th ward was dry. You couldn't buy any booze in the 8th ward. And the 7th ward merchants really liked that, because if you lived in the 8th ward but you wanted to drink, where was the nearest place to go? Drive down. Of course, I-55 wasn't there then. The main highway was U.S. Highway 51, right? So people would drive down U.S. 51 to Hammond. That was the nearest place, and they would buy all their weekend booze. So liquor laws literally were different in places that were really close together, 7th Ward, 8th Ward. We also discovered that the bars stayed open later in East Baton Rouge Parish than they did in Tangipahoa Parish. And so if we really wanted to party, we would drive to Baton Rouge, and we would go to a bar in East Baton Rouge Parish, and we could drink legally until midnight. So what did we do at that point? Did we drive home drunk from Baton Rouge? No. We drove drunk to West Baton Rouge across the old Highway 190 bridge, because the I-10 bridge wasn't there, because the bars in West Baton Rouge Parish didn't close until 2 o'clock in the morning. So you see all these different booze laws? All of those laws are perfectly constitutional, because Section 2 of the 21st Amendment gives the power to create the booze laws back to the states, which is where the power had been before the 18th Amendment came into existence, right? Section 3, once again, is an expiration date of 7 years. We're not going to go over that again. You know what that is, right? All right. 22nd Amendment. Okay, let me give you the background here. In the original Constitution, there were no term limits on U.S. representatives, U.S. senators, or presidents, right? As long as the people back home would keep electing you, you could continue to serve. Now, tradition had become that presidents would only serve 2 terms and then they would voluntarily retire. And that was really based on George Washington's actions. When Washington served 2 terms and he retired, went home to Mount Vernon, right? And Americans so highly respected Thomas Jefferson that they figured that they so respected George Washington that they figured that anything that George Washington did had to be right. Well, he had retired after 2 terms, and so subsequent presidents sort of created a tradition. It wasn't a law, it was a tradition that they would serve 2 terms and then leave office. And that was the way it was until the 20th century. Presidents voluntarily served 2 and out. Until Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932. He was elected in 1932. He was reelected in 1936. Now, when 1940 rolled around, if Roosevelt had been the typical president, what would he have done? He would have retired, right? And somebody else would have been elected president. But in 1940, the United States was right squarely in the middle of the Great Depression, and Franklin Roosevelt was in the process of he didn't solve the Great Depression, but he was able to maybe ease the seriousness of it a little bit. And so in 1940, he said, I'm going to run for a 3rd term. Because you don't need to change presidents at this critical point in time. Things are getting better, but they're not right yet. Give me credit for making things better, and then hopefully we'll solve the economic problem. And the American people elected him to a 3rd term. It was the first time that anyone had ever been elected 3 times. But the story's not over. 1944 rolls around. And Roosevelt decides to run for a 4th term. Why? Because by that time, the Great Depression is over. Sure it is. But we're squarely in the middle of World War II. And Roosevelt makes the same argument. Look, I've been the president for this entire war. Why would you want to change presidents at this critical? We have the Germans and the Japanese on the run. Why would you want to change presidents right now? Let's finish the job. And the American people elected him the 4th time. Now, the 22nd Amendment was ratified in 1951, 6 years after Roosevelt's death. Okay? And what the 22nd Amendment does, it creates term limits for the president, something that had never been done before. Okay, here is what the 22nd Amendment says. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. And no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. Complicated. Now, I will admit this is complicated. Usually I'll say, oh, it sounds complicated, but it's really not. Well, this is complicated. The easy thing is you cannot be elected more than twice. That's engraved in stone. But if you served more than half of somebody else's term, you cannot be elected twice. You can only be elected one more time. Let me give you a real life example. This is not theoretical. This is the real deal. By the time that John Kennedy becomes the president, the 22nd Amendment was in effect. All right. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas in November of 1963. He has served more than half of his term. Lyndon Johnson is his vice president, and Lyndon Johnson becomes president of the United States. Johnson serves out Kennedy's unexpired term. And then in 1964, Johnson is elected to a term of his own. Here's the question. Could Johnson be elected once again in 1968 to a second term of his own? And the answer is yes. Why? Because he served less than half of Kennedy's unexpired term. Now, that's true. That's history. Now, let's make something up. What would have happened if Kennedy had been assassinated after being the president only 6 months and Johnson became the president? Johnson could have been elected to a term of his own, but here's the question again. Could he have been elected to a second term on his own? And the answer is no. Why? Because he served more than half of Kennedy's unexpired term in that scenario. So let me read that again. Maybe it'll make a little bit more sense now. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. And no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person, Kennedy, was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article was proposed by the Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term within which this article becomes operative from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of such term. Now, once again, let's get back to the old official way. This sounds complicated, but it's not. We can reduce this down to just a few words. Who was the president of the United States when the 22nd Amendment was ratified? It was Harry Truman. Harry Truman had served, he became president when Franklin Roosevelt died. Roosevelt died in office in the summer of 1945, and Truman served more than half of Roosevelt's unexpired term. And then in 1948, Truman was elected on his own. Remember, the 22nd Amendment was not in effect. What does that mean? That means that Truman could run forever and be elected as long as the people would like him to stay, because Truman, the Constitution does what we call grandfathering. Truman is grandfathered. He was the president when the amendment was created, and therefore the terms of the 22nd Amendment did not apply to him. So he was the last of the old kind of presidents who could be elected 3, 4, 5, 10, 50 times. So to whom did the terms of the 22nd Amendment apply for the first time? It was Eisenhower. Eisenhower was elected in 52 after the 22nd Amendment was ratified. So, and starting with Eisenhower and continuing down to today, presidents are term limited under the terms of the 22nd Amendment, but not Harry Truman. And Section 2 has a time limit, 7-year time limit. The 23rd Amendment, Section 1. The district constituting the seat of government of the United States shall appoint in such manner as the Congress may direct a number of electors, a number of members of the Electoral College. That's what this is talking about in this context. A number of members of the Electoral College for president and vice president equal to the whole number of senators and representatives in Congress to which the district would be entitled if it were a state, but in no event more than the least populous state. They shall be in addition to those appointed by the states, but they shall be considered for the purposes of the election of president and vice president to be members of the electoral college appointed by a state, and they shall meet in the district and perform such duties as provided by the 12th article of amendment. Okay. Once again, sounds complicated. It's not. The first thing you need to understand is that the District of Columbia is not a state. All right? That's why it's not called the State of Columbia. It's called the District of Columbia. If you believe that, and you should because it's true, if you believe that, then it's easy then to understand that only states only states are members of the Electoral College. Constitution is very clear. Each state gets two members of the Electoral College, right? Each state. District of Columbia is not a state, therefore it has no electors. And what does that mean? What did that mean? Now, the 23rd Amendment was ratified in 1961. What this means is that before 1961, if you lived in the District of Columbia, you couldn't vote for president or vice president. Oh, that can't be right. Yes, it is. You could vote for all that other stuff. You could vote for mayor and city council and school board and all that stuff because those were local elections. But you could not vote for president and vice president because the District of Columbia was not a state. The reason that it was like that, no one in 1787 could have ever imagined that the city of Washington, D.C. would have ever become as big as it is. Everybody just thought that the capital would be located there and that the Supreme Court would come by every once in a while to make decisions and they'd go home, that members of the House and the Senate would come by every once in a while and debate stuff and make decisions and go home, that there would be very few permanent residents of the city of Washington, D.C. And of course, they were wrong because the city of Washington, D.C. becomes a big city. Now, it wasn't a big deal back in the days when very few people lived there. It wasn't a big deal that they couldn't vote for president and vice president. But by 1961, it was a very big deal because there were a lot of people living in Washington, D.C., and they did not have all the rights of citizenship. They couldn't vote for president and vice president. So that's what the 23rd Amendment does. It gives them the right to vote for president and vice president. But I want you to write this down and I want you to circle it and underline it and draw arrows to it. The 23rd Amendment did not make Washington, D.C. a state. Rather, what it does, it gives them representation in the Electoral College as if they were a state, which they're not. Now, how is a state's member of the Electoral College determined? We did this, feels like forever ago. You take the number of U.S. senators that a state has, 2, and you add to that the number of U.S. representatives a state has, and that number varies. You add those two numbers, and that's the number of members of the Electoral College that a state has. What about the District of Columbia? They're not a state, but they're treated as if they were a state in this one case. They are given the number of electors that they would have if they were a state. And what does that mean? They're given 2 electors because they would have 2 senators if they were a state. But they're not given the number of electors based on their population. What it says is they're given the number of electors that that the lowest populated state has. Now, are you aware that some states only have 1 U.S. representative? All states have 2 senators, but some states only have 1 U.S. representative because, Wyoming, for God's sakes, has more elk than it has people, doesn't it? Alaska has more grizzly bears than it has people. But you got to have at least one. That's what Article 1 said. You got to have at least, everybody is going to have 2 senators, and everybody has to have at least 1 representative. And so that rule applies to Washington, D.C. So here's the bottom line. How many members of the Electoral College does Washington, D.C. have? 3. 2 U.S. senators and 1 U.S. representative, because they cannot have any more than the least populated state. And some states only have 1, and so that's why they only have the 1. So 3. Okay, let's read that whole thing again, and it might make a little bit more sense. A number of electors, a president and vice president, equal to the whole number of senators and representatives in Congress, to which the district would be entitled if it were a state, which is not, right? But if it were a state, but in no event more than the least populous state, that's 1. They shall be in addition to those appointed by the states, but they shall be considered for the purposes of the election of president and vice president to be electors appointed by a state. And they shall meet in the district and perform such duties as provided by the 12th article of amendment. All right, let's simplify that one, please. Once the members of the Electoral College from Washington, D.C. are chosen, they act like every other member of the Electoral College acts. No different. They still meet in the district to vote. They still tally the votes. They still swear that the numbers are accurate. They seal the envelope. They send it to the president of the Senate. He reads the votes in a joint session of Congress. Everything stays the same. The only difference is they now have electoral votes. And that number right now is 3. And it's been 3 for years and years and years. Section 2, the Congress will have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. There's no time limit. There's no expiration date. It simply says that the Congress can enforce it. 24th Amendment, Section 1. Now, this was ratified in 1964. And this is significant, and I'll explain why. Let me read it first. The right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or representative in Congress, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. Now, a poll tax was very common in the United States, beginning in the late 1800s and then into the 20th century. Fundamentally, what a poll tax was, you had to pay for the right to vote. You had to go down to the parish courthouse by a certain date every year. You had to pay your poll tax. You had to get a receipt for it. You had to keep your receipt because you might be asked to produce the receipt to prove that you had paid the poll tax. Why is it called a poll tax? Because you had to show the receipt when you went to the polls to vote, right? The very idea of having to pay for the right to vote is so undemocratic. The poll tax, the purpose of the poll tax was very simple. The poll tax was used in states to deny poor people the right to vote. And what was the economic status of most black Americans? They, by nature, were poor people. The poll tax was not that much. Some state, and it varied from state to state, by the way. Some states it might be 50 cents. Another state it might be 75. Another state it might be $1, but it never was much. But the very poor quite often didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, much less 50 cents. They operated on a credit basis down at the store, right? They never had any money. And if you couldn't pay your tax, you couldn't get a receipt. And if you couldn't show your receipt, you couldn't vote. And it was used as a tool, the poll tax was used as a tool literally to disenfranchise, that's a fancy word, to take away the vote of many Americans, including most black Americans. And the 24th Amendment fixed that. It outlaws the poll tax. It says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary, right, or other election. So it doesn't matter. It covers all elections for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or for representatives in Congress, shall not be denied or altered, abridged, affected by the United States or by any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. So, the reason that little phrase "or other tax" is there is that the people who wrote the 24th Amendment understood that the southern states where this was really bad, the southern states might do away with the poll tax, but they might create a different tax by another name that did the same thing. Right? And what was the same thing? Deny people the right to vote. So they covered they covered everything here. By reason of failure to pay any poll tax or any other tax, no matter what you call it. 1964. Now, the 24th Amendment only applies to these so-called federal offices: president, vice president, U.S. senator, U.S. representative. And the idea was that those were the important offices. Those were the office. That was the reason why the poll tax was applied to the poor people, to let the middle class and the wealthy elect those really important offices. The idea in Washington was that if you take away charging the poll tax for those really important offices, that it won't be worth it to the states to maintain the poll taxes for those lesser offices like governor and state legislature and parish police jurymen and those types of things. And they were right. Once the poll tax was done away with regard to the national taxes, national offices, the states voluntarily did away with the poll taxes on those state and local offices. And Section 2 says the Congress shall have power to